Hey, RJ,
Yeah,
why can't you hear pterodactyls go to the bathroom?
I hate you.
Because the P is silent.
Of course. I really hate you.
And this is system.debug.
Boo doo boo 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 boo
Hey
boo.
guys.
Hi. So, all right. So tonight we're talking about backup and redundancy with our good friend Abe Reyes. And Abe is the CTO at Map Anything, but he's also one of the few people who get to claim that he has every single AWS certification under the sun. Is that correct, Abe?
That
You have
is
them all.
correct.
It's like Pokemon.
Gotta catch them all, man. Gotta get all those AWS certs.
Oh, Pokemon or AWS. All right.
AWS?
So tonight we are talking about, um, backing up your code, backing up your data, redundancy in your org to make sure that your users don't get locked out of things when it's important that they don't. Right. So your sandboxes and things like that. Um, and that's kind of why we brought in Abe. Right. So Abe handles a lot of the back end at Map Anything and has to constantly deal with changes. Right. So why should we back things up, Abe?
Important question.
Well, why do you think we should back things up? Let's just see what you think.
Well, this isn't like a work interview. This isn't like I'm
Give
asking the
me interview.
questions.
I
Grind.
All
so
right, so
for the
why should we
most
back
part,
things up? We should back things
yeah,
up because it's important to back things up, right? In case of failures.
right.
Like number one key point is that if something fails, we want to make sure that we can uh, bring it back, right? Like an
So
old version of it or anything like that. And it's the same thing with redundancy. When something fails, when a server goes down, like we saw with AWS servers last year, right? That Northeast had that huge down,
right.
or where everything went down and like half of Google just disappeared for a good 12 hours, right? That's
Right.
why we have redundancy in these sort of things. That's why Salesforce, that's why other companies put their database servers in multiple locations, and they don't store them all in San Francisco and all in New York. They put some over in London, they put some over in San Francisco and New York, and just in different locations for that same reason, right?
Right. So at the end of the day, you basically touched on two things. So one is backup, right? And like you said, you for the most part, you're backing things up because you want to have an ability to recover or restore files or things that are important to you as a person, the organization, so on and so forth. But in addition to that, then you have redundancy, right? That's a separate thing. So redundancy, it's more to have some type of failover ability. So, for example, like you said, hey, my website is up, my website goes down. How can I, fail over to a separate instance of that website so that I can continue serving my customers? And it is a type of backup in a way, but backup for the most part, it's hey, my website got hosed. I no longer have access to it. I need a way to recover and essentially start from scratch. Hopefully, not start from scratch, but start from a point in time. So that's kind of the key differences between the two.
Yeah, so one is a backup of services and the other is a backup of data.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's a good way to look at it. Yep.
Yeah, I mean the idea, and I know Abe knows this, but for all the people listening out there, the idea is that you don't notice redundancy ever. You should never ever notice it, and then when everything fails, you still shouldn't notice that the redundancy in there is there, and that's the key. That's the key reason that people don't want to pay for that kind of stuff. People shy away from it and they say, "Oh, we don't need that." I've never seen it work. I've never seen it happen, and you'll hear a lot of people say stuff like that, and they just don't understand that it's seamless. It should be seamless.
Right. And it's always an afterthought, just like security, like you said. It's always hey, I had all these pictures on my phone. My phone falls into a pool. My phone is no longer accessible. Oh man, my pictures. Then it all of a sudden hits you and it's like, what happened? Right. It's like, well, maybe you should have backed them up.
Yeah.
Sounds
And
like
that
you've had this experience before, Abe.
I,
You've
I,
rubbed your phone in a
yeah,
pool.
it's happened to me a couple of times.
I want to say everyone's had that experience, and everyone
Yeah.
understands the idea of the fact that data for the most part, if you have very specific data, pictures of your kids, pictures of your pets, pictures of your family, phone numbers, whatever it is, whatever data that you feel is precious to you and priceless to you, if you lose that, that's a heartache, man, for you, right?
Right.
For the most part. And if you haven't backed it up, it's nearly impossible to get back, or you should consider it impossible to get back at least.
Right. For the most part, it's nearly impossible.
So that brings up a really good question, though. What should we back up, and does everything need to be backed up?
You know, that's something that's very there's different strategies for that. And you know, we can speak to those. There's like a pilot light strategies, there's a warm standby, and this is more at the enterprise level, I guess, right? It's like pilot light strategies, warm standbys, active. You know, there's a couple of approaches that you can take towards how you back up your data and what those recovery mechanisms are. But at the end of the day, it's a very personal decision. It's, hey, when it comes to you as a person, it's, hey, for the most part, I want to back up my photos, my pictures. Like to us as a family, pictures way up there. Documents, not so much. For a company, it may be, you know, I don't know, maybe they have some legal compliances that they need to meet, right? Like, hey, you need to retain certain type of data for X amount of years. So for that company, that now becomes very important. In another situation, it may be, hey, we want to back up, you know, some of the data around the services that we provide to our users, so that if we happen to go down, we are able to recover these services. Keep in mind, in the whole disaster recovery like scene, backup and restore is by far the cheapest method of redundancy. So that's kind of where you begin. That's like baby step number one is a backup and restore procedure. Why? Because one, it's the slowest, and two, for the most part, it's the one that has the most gap. So it's not like you're backing up your data every minute, right? For the most part, you're looking at a backup once a day. So imagine if for an organization, you know, you lose all your services or you lose your data. Well, that means that you'll have a gap of 24 hours. And that may or may not be acceptable depending on what type of organization you are. So that's typically why backup and restore is considered like step one.
Yeah, you can also, if you really want to, a second level to that would be to provide yourself a stopgap, which is essentially a secondary, just like that day's backups and things like that. But another good kind of thing that comes out of this is exactly what you were talking about with like legal constraints, essentially, right? So if you're working on, let's say, pretty much anything, but anything like HIPAA, FERPA, anything that has to do with like legal status and things like that, you need to have that, or taxes even, right?
Yeah.
In the US, you need to have those, you need to have backups for like anywhere from a year to like 7, maybe even 10 years for some of those things. So these are like things that your business will hinge on, right? Like if you lose, imagine you're a lawyer and you lose all of your data, like that's pretty much the end of you.
A problem.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. But yeah, so that's kind of what we're talking about here. That's what Abe's talking about. If you have data and you need to hold on to it legally for a certain amount of time, and I know a lot of you guys are out there in Salesforce and working with all kinds of different records, accounts, this and that. Those things may not be a prime example of this, but just think from a legal perspective. If you've ever been involved with universities, if you've ever been involved with lawyers, any of those people. So kind of think from that perspective.
So basically, like, not everything needs to be backed up then, right? Just specifically what information is pertinent and necessary to keep your company running, right? Whether it be for legal standpoints and stuff like that, but you don't need to keep absolutely everything, right?
Right.
Who normally would make those decisions?
I mean, I think for the most part, those are key stakeholders in the company that are identified. Sometimes it could be the CEO, sometimes it could be the legal department, sometimes it could be HR. It depends. Sometimes it's a departmental decision, or sometimes it could be an organization-wide decision or a combination of both. So that pretty much depends on what type of company you're in. You're going to have those decisions made either by a collective group or by an individual.
All right. And what are some of the resources people can utilize to backup, and how do we go about accessing those resources? Is there, is it just the AWS platform? Are there other ways that users can be backing things up?
Right. So, I mean, backups for the most part are, platform dependent. So just like, let's say, Macs have the time machine, Windows has, backup and system restore. Salesforce will have its own methodologies, AWS, Azure, so on and so forth. So what you do is you just, depending on the platform where your data is, the platform that you're using to interact with your data is probably going to be what guides you to the tools that you'll need to back up your information.
Now, do a lot of these services, so obviously you're most familiar with AWS, do they have ways that they are kind of automatically backing up your stuff for you in case something goes down? So let's just say, like in the case of AWS last year, where it crashed, there's a lot of information in that server probably that went down. Is that just based on redundancy of your data, or is it like a backup of the data when it went down?
So that's a good question. There's a big misconception when it comes to cloud computing and what it provides you as a user and what you should expect from it. So I'll take a step back. The whole reason you should look at cloud computing in the following way. All these platform services, what they do is they provide, it's a shared responsibility model, right? So they kind of take care of a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to physical infrastructure, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, you are responsible as an individual for your own security and your own backup and restore procedures in the cloud. Now, keep in mind, in services like AWS, there are some services where these services are managed services, so-called managed services, where, you can, with the click of a button, you can essentially say, hey, back this up, daily, or back this up hourly, right? But there are some services where, let's say you are hosting something in, let's say, an EC2 instance, and you have to make sure that you put in some controls to back up that information yourself into, S3 or into an EBS volume. You are in control of, again, still the tool that you choose to back up your own data.
And there are a lot of them out there, right?
Right.
So, I mean, you've got, if you're in the market for something like that and you're going out there and you're looking through this monstrous heap of things out there, and I know, because, I mean, this is from experience, right? You go out there, you look, it's almost disheartening. It's like too many choices, right? So you're looking and you're looking and you're looking, and you have no idea what to get. What would you suggest, just kind of in a general sort of cloud sense, I guess you'd say, or I mean, even AWS specific, but in general, what's the one that either you use or you like to use or you find the easiest to use interface wise and things like that?
Sure. So personally, like, let's say for our pictures, I'm an Amazon Prime member, and Amazon has Prime Photos, right? So they give you unlimited storage capacity for photos and certain amount of capacity for videos. But then for a very small fee, you can allocate like 100 gigabytes of storage, which is plenty. I mean, depending on the amount of videos you're recording, but it's a good amount of data storage. And we use that as a family to, let's say, back up our photos, our videos. It also gives you basic versioning capabilities. So for example, if you go in there and you back up a few pictures and then you're like, oops, I didn't mean to back that up, it gives you like 30 days, which you could go in. And there's others like, OneDrive, iCloud, so on and so forth. As far as businesses go, or let's say within AWS, you could use a service like S3, which is an object storage service. And you can use it and turn on versioning, turn on multi-region replication, And basically, again, keep in mind, this is you doing this setup. But as you do this setup, you're making sure that the data that you're storing there, one, will be highly redundant because of the I guess that comes baked in with the service. But you also put in like versioning, let's say, to make sure that you do back up your data in case somebody goes in, deletes a file. It's like, okay, no worries. We have other versions associated to that file, so let's just restore it from there. And that could be another option. Granted, there's tons of others, like you just said, semantic backup and restore, a bunch of others that have been around for a while. But for the most part, if you keep it simple, it kind of does. It's able to do some type of scheduling and back up your files and allow you to restore them and have some type of basic versioning. I think that's good enough.
How often, like if you're say you're just deciding now, and you're going to start backing up, say, your Salesforce data, right? Rule of thumb, just basic. How often should you do it?
So, I mean, again, organizational decision, because that now aligns itself with the RPO, which is the recovery point objective of an organization. So an organization will typically have some type of SLA internally or even maybe externally or both that says, hey, we want to restore data. At a minimum, our data loss has to be restricted to 24 hours. So that would force you to a daily backup, a schedule, for example. However, you could be like Visa and they need to restore transactions up to the minute or maybe even up to the second, who knows, right? So now that forces you to have a more aggressive backup and restore procedure.
So, so I know that you just stated just good rule of thumb, we'll say it's 24 hours, right? Like you should try to keep your data at least from the last 24 hours.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you should hold up well though? And things like that. So certain it's simply the same as a business's tax receipts, right? You want to keep those for 7 years because you get audited. Time when you kind of look at it and you go, why do you still have this anymore?
Right. But if you think about it, that can also get expensive depending on the method that you use, right? So if you're doing a full copy of your backup every day, and let's say that you back up 1 gigabyte of data every day, so 10 days, 10 gigabytes now, right? So that could also get pretty expensive. So you also have to be careful on what type of strategy you use. For the most part, it's typically, full backup, let's say on a Monday, and then incrementals, which are just little changes that happen each day, right? But that comes with its own set of complexities.
So, and I understand, so now up to this point, in our conversation, we've been talking primarily data focused, right? Mm-hmm. What about your code?
When it comes to your code, you rely heavily on your repositories. I mean, at the end of the day, your repository is in one way your backup repository as well as your working repository. And believe it or not, nowadays we put a lot of this burden on, services that we use like GitHub or Bitbucket or GitHost, right? And we expect that from them. But it's also sometimes important to kind of, maybe every once in a while, if you have a big source code repository, to just back it up manually, and put it into some other cloud provider, because you never know, right? You never know when one day, let's say in a service like GitHost, you just crash your instance and you lose your repository, and now what, right? So it's always important to kind of have a little bit of redundancy, when it comes to your backup strategy as well.
And I mean, that's like a really good point, because at the end of the day, if let's just say you download your data, right? That hard drive, that's your hard drive. You've got that hard drive, right? As long as it is a piece of hardware that is functioning, that's yours. You're good to go.
Right.
But to your point, when you back up, say, even version control through GitHost or everyone talks about their GitHub and everything like that. Like any business, that could fail at any time, right? or it could go out of business.
Or user
Hosting
error.
anything costs money. Hosting servers and data, all of that actually costs money. So there's,
You could
a good chance
accidentally
that at any
document
time, that
some
company could
hardware.
bankrupt.
Right.
Yeah.
Or somebody could accidentally just delete the repository. Now what?
Hopefully you've set up your user accounts
Right.
such that they don't. But yeah, I mean, that could definitely happen. There's a lot of crazy. Just imagine any of the craziest things. And I know that this is probably what Abe does on a daily basis. Imagine all the craziest things that could ever possibly happen to your data. And one day, most of those things will probably happen to it.
Yep. So it's all about mitigating, right? Mitigating risk. Mitigating risk around what you've deemed is important to you.
I mean, that's kind of like the old school. You guys remember the websites, Angel Fire, GeoCities, things like that, right?
Yeah, I hope you backed all yours up.
I did.
So this is kind of a left field sort of question, right? You're operating on a budget. You're running a company. You're operating on a budget, right? If you had your way completely, if you said, "Look, I'm taking over the budget for this," what's a good percentage do you think, just in your head, and again, kind of off the cuff, what's a good percentage that a company should probably dedicate to these sorts of services, like budget-wise?
That's a very good question. But I would say probably like a 20% should go into that. Because for the most part, everything else is going to be like your operational costs. So I don't think it should kind of, take over that. But it should definitely be significant enough to where it's not an afterthought, right? It's something that has sufficient funds allocated to it. It's something that we're all aware of. And, we're essentially using, hopefully, those funds efficiently to mitigate risk.
And I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyway because I know that there's a lot of people out there who probably don't know about this, but essentially kind of pointing towards like Glacier and things like that, cold storage, right? What are some good, I guess not really a rule of thumb, but if you can speak to it, what's a good idea for taking your essentially good data, your perfectly fine backups, right? And kind of moving them in order to, again, exactly what you said, sort of mitigate some of those costs and lessen some of the costs while still keeping all of your backups.
So cold storage within itself is a good strategy to lowering your backup costs. So at the end of the day, what you're doing with cold storage is, to those of you out there that may not know, you can pay for, a certain type of storage, which is classified as, hey, whatever I put here is not going to be accessed too much, either writes or reads, right? So a good example of that would be, well, my family and I, we've been collecting pictures over the past 12 years, right? Well, for the most part, you don't really go back 12 years every single day to look at all of your pictures, right? So a good strategy would be, why don't I just submit, the past 10 years to cold storage? Because those pictures, for the most part, they're close to me. I want to keep them, but we're not looking at them every single day. So I'm going to put them in what's so-called slower storage, which therefore lowers your cost, but it's still secure, right? So at the end of the day, a good strategy would be, let's say, a laboratory with genomic data. It's like, hey, you need to keep that genomic data for the next 25 years. It wouldn't be smart to keep all that genomic data on an SSD, right? It's like, why would you do that? I mean, so what? Yeah, that'd be awful. So it's
really
like,
bad.
all right, let's back up this data and let's just put it kind of in a life cycle to where, hey, after 2 years, we cycle this data off to cold storage, which, oh, by the way, back in the day used to be tapes. That's essentially what everybody did with tapes.
Yeah, the old magnetic tapes.
Yeah, which have their own problems. It's like, don't run magnets by them.
don't mess them up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, like, are magnets really still an issue?
People still use
they
magnetic tape backup.
Stuff.
Yeah, people
they
still use
the tape.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like, I feel. Oh, what was the one? what's not Glacier? What's the other one? Snowball? Is that the one where they
Right.
bring
Snowball.
the whole suitcase to you and they'll
Right.
load up like petabytes of data? And
Basically, yeah, military grade suitcase. Here
yeah,
you go, load it up, and we take it back.
and that's where you'll probably put like all your old magnetic storage. You'll just offload it onto this big old thing and just let it like, okay, now that's super safe. Now I can throw this
Right.
junk out, you know.
Do they give you like a suitcase with like the handcuff?
You could definitely ask for security, believe it or not. But no, it does look like one of those though.
It
It's
does. It's
very beefy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super scary looking. They'll even send I don't
Like
know,
a
I think they
military
might have
grade
shut
tough
that
book.
service down, but they'll send like a truck. If you have
Right.
enough data, they'll send
The
like a giant
snowmobile.
truck. Yeah,
Yeah.
the snowmobile, yeah.
It's
Did they
ridiculous.
kill that or is that still live?
Yeah, that's life. I mean, big companies are seriously using that. It's ridiculous.
I mean, if you have like 40 exabytes of data, you're not trying to send that over any sort of network.
Right. Just imagine Netflix, right? I
Yeah.
the
Oh
amount,
yeah,
the
dude.
amount of data that they.
I'm emailing it to you, but I've put it in 18 million emails.
Yeah, exactly. Can't even Google won't even allow you to send it in one. But that's a good point that you bring up, right? Netflix, they probably have a wild backup strategy. I'm sure you or Brian has read about it. Do you guys know what they use by any chance? This, again, just kind of a
So they go by like the whole chaos monkey framework, which
yeah,
essentially really that forces your organization to live in a very active environment. So it's almost like they're which is the most expensive, right? We mentioned backup and restore as like baby step number one, the cheapest method. Then it's like pilot light, where it's like, hey, let's just back up some stuff, but not everything. Then there's warm standby, which is, hey, let's back up everything, but not have it turned on because it'll cost us, money, right, to keep it running.
yeah,
I think a company like Netflix at this point operates in the hot standbys or active scenarios where it's like they just have a ton of copies of everything running at all times, right? And it's like highly redundancy or redundant, I should say, a multi-regional approach. And I think that's how I'd be interested to see how they do their versioning. I know that that's their approach on, or at least what I've read around their services. It's just highly redundant environments. As far as data goes, I'd imagine they'd use the same type of strategy around S3, submitting cold storage or maybe unused or not watched videos to, Glacier and just pulling them out when somebody requests them. So who knows?
yeah.
But that's
Because it
what I
doesn't take too long, right? It's like, isn't it like 2 or 3 minutes or 3 to 5 minutes or something like that
Yeah, so now
to
you
pull from
can,
Glacier?
yeah, you can do expedited requests now. Back, a few months ago, I was going to say back in the day, but a few months ago, it was
Back in
like,
the day.
yeah, 2 to 4 hours. I mean, it's crazy. Technology moves so fast,
Yeah. I
feels
bet
like
I
it was
bet
years ago.
whoever Netflix is using, I'm assuming they're using AWS, but whoever they're using, they probably have a nice little paragraph or two dedicated to
Yeah.
like, hey, this is going to be in cold storage, but I need it right away,
Right.
and we'll pay you bazillions of dollars.
Yeah.
So Jarrett Taylor is in the chat, and he's asking, in AWS, do you find the majority of entities use all AWS means to back up their environment rather than third party? So kind of to sum that up, is everyone using AWS for their environment rather than some other third party like Symantec or whoever else is out there among means?
Um, I think so. There are you in the AWS. It has a marketplace, and you can use semantic backup or whoever else has a backup service out there.
Mhm.
And what they do is they piggyback off of the AWS services. But for the most part, in most organizations, I've seen just using the services in their kind of vanilla state, right? It's like just raw S3. I use the tools that AWS provides me, lifecycle policies and all that. Yeah.
And then he's got another question. So what would you recommend for a startup with a hosted system platform, 100% in AWS for backups? So he's, I guess according to the question, he's got all his stuff on AWS already. So what would you recommend to them for their backups?
Right. So for that, I would probably go with S3, depending on the type of service that you're running. Let's say if it's EC2s, kind of use leverage snapshots. If you're using RDS for your database tier, again, leverage snapshots, which essentially leverages S3 under the hood. If there are things that fall outside of that scope, just use S3 natively. You can download and use tools like S3 Browser, which give you a nice little GUI to upload your files, or just do it over the web. They have a nice little web interface.
Yeah, and just to be clear, what would be the advantage of leveraging those snapshots?
So the snapshots give you a point-in-time recovery for your EC2 instance. So imagine your EC2 instance being Windows Server with IIS and a couple of other services thrown out there, and it's like that took you a ton of time to set up and configure. If you took a snapshot of that, what it'll do is it'll save an image of that server and its services as it was in that point in time. So you never, hopefully, have to go through the burden of setting all that again.
And you can also use that for other things, right? Like spinning up new instances and things like that.
Right,
If you want
like
replicas.
clones, right.
Yeah. Yep. So what about the snapshots on the database? Those probably cost $1 million, right?
No, not at all. I mean, the price is relatively low. At the end of the day, what's expensive in cloud computing is compute and memory power.
Yeah.
Networking, is up there, but for the most part, storage has been it's pretty accessible nowadays. That is for sure.
So good to note that when you're out there and you've got a database maybe full of data that you don't want to lose, if you do leverage those snapshots on AWS, not really that pricey.
Right. Not that pricey at all.
Yeah. All right. I guess that kind of does it. You got any questions, BJ?
No, I really want to thank you so much, Abe, for taking the time to join us tonight.
Yeah, definitely
appreciate it.
Anytime, guys.
If you liked the episode, if you want to see more of it, if you want to see more of Abe, make sure to comment below. But if you liked us, like the video, subscribe. We always like subscribers.
Yeah, and we got his whatchamacallit, do the thing, where we point down. We got his Twitter handle in the comments, so make sure to tweet him and ask him questions if you've got some more.
And we'll also share links from our co-host Megan Broadkey's blog about backing up your data as well. So if you want to learn more about that, yeah, I believe it's Salesforce specific. So make sure that you tune in for that, and we will keep you posted on any other things that you have interest in. Always make sure to ask questions. We want to thank you for joining us. We had a great time. Thank you, Abe.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
All right. Everybody have a great night. Ryan's not here. He'll do that on the show, in the podcast. If you listen, he'll bump me out right now and probably mute me.